Hi, Dickens. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good, Jack. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. As I was just saying before, I just want to thank you so much for the podcast that you've made. It really is, I don't know, incredible. It's just absolutely incredible. And like if all this stuff is true, which I mean I have no reason not to believe, but I've only heard it through one podcast. But if true, I think this is like the biggest podcast I've ever heard. Like the information being kind of given. There's just so much. I don't know, so much that changes how we view ourselves, how we view how the universe works, how we view how society has been treating nonverbal autistic kids for so many years. It really is a mind blowing podcast. So yeah, thanks again for doing it. I was wondering, yeah, it really seems like it's taken the world by storm. It's just kind of I've told so many people about it. What has the response been since releasing the podcast?
First of all, I mean, it's been extremely unexpected, and I know that I've been just really taken aback by how broadly received and accepted the podcast has been. And I know the families and teachers involved feel the same way, just because so many of them for years have been, kind of shouldering this secret in a lot of ways, or sharing it to not very welcoming ears and hearts. So I think this is beyond anything we had could have ever expected. And it's been a lot of incoming mails and that type of thing. But, it's mostly been really positive of people feeling that they're, like you said, that their lives have been somehow changed, or it's really changed them deeply on a spiritual level and intellectual level. So it's really beautiful to receive those messages.
Yeah. So, I mean, going into making this podcast, which, really, I guess the beginning point was kind of exploring the work of Dr. Diane Hennacy Powell into,
Hmm.
exploring the notion of, well, there's a few things going on, but initially exploring the notion of telepathic abilities displayed within nonverbal autistic kids, and that also expands into a wide range of spiritual abilities, which are pretty amazing as well. How going into this, how is making this podcast and exploring and researching, how has it changed your entire worldview?
I mean, it's changed everything. And I think that's important for listeners to know is up until the telepathy tapes, I was working on social issue documentaries. I was working on trying to get affordable access to medical, insurance, which we don't have in the United States, right? Or access to paid family medical leave so people didn't have to go back to work days within having a baby, which actually is a reality in the United States too. So I was working on things like that. And I certainly did not put much stock in what people would call woo-woo stuff, right? And so when this started, I didn't really even know what journey I was embarking on, and I didn't know if Dr. Powell was could be a trusted scientist, or if she was taking advantage of these families, or what was going on. So I just started following where it led, and of course, as the podcast reveals, discovered that this, you know, from what everything I can tell is completely true, that these families are telepathic, and these non-speaking individuals have incredible spiritual gifts. And so once you see that happening, that over and over again, these telepathy tests are coming out 100% accurate, uh, with person after person, with test after test. And then you're seeing it just at dinner, when you accrue dinner or walking into the house, like it was just something that was just part and parcel of this world. Then I started to revisit all the other things that I just dismissed, right? If telepathy is possible, then what else is real that I'd always just kind of shrugged off? So it really made me recalculate what I thought about, kind of what the ancient religions of the world have always said,
Mm.
spirituality, even things like mediumship, clairvoyance. There's almost reincarnation. There's almost nothing that I didn't revisit and consider.
Yeah, I mean, have you been much of a spiritual person your entire life? Like, has that been a big part of your life, or are you pretty kind of, I don't know, scientifically minded in general, or a bit of both?
I mean, I've always been deeply scientifically minded.
Mm.
It's like every book I read practically is nonfiction. I'm often reading books a month. So That's kind of a joke with everyone who knows me, is there's like Kai needs more input, like constant, like putting facts and knowledge into my brain, but I think there's always been a deep sense of wonderment and longing for like a spiritual connection as well. I think myself, like many people, have felt scared of the church, of organized religion. I've seen the harm it's done to people and groups, and how it has been used to oppress and control and kill and justify, pretty dark things. And I'm not saying that of religious people. I'm saying organized religion as a whole can be really scary. So I've never felt at home in many organized religions. But I think, like many people, there's always been that deep curiosity, like why we're here, where we're going, and what it means.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you mentioned ancient, ancient traditions and stuff. I mean, like, yeah, there's so many things that are covered in the later episodes of this podcast that, it almost seems like the human race has actually been very interested in these things more time than the current time period of this kind of scientific revolution of being much more materialistically minded, and we measure the world on what we can physically observe and stuff. But for pretty much all of our history, there has been a much more of an emphasis on the journey of the soul, the afterlife, God, all sorts of different mystical ideas and mythologies and things. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of, I don't know, we'll unpack the kind of scientific materialist worldview as well. But yeah, it's not that groundbreaking in context of the history of the human race, right? These kinds of ideas.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So why do you think, why nonverbal autists do you think that this is kind of being displayed in? And yeah, what exactly do you think it is about? What exactly are nonverbal autists? I know many people of different neurodivergence or on various degrees of being on the spectrum. I can't say that I've actually met too many nonverbal autistic people. So what is it exactly that makes them unique, and why do you think these abilities are being displayed in them?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important, there's a lot of great questions in there. So the Telepathy Tapes podcast really centers on non-speaking individuals and what appears to be their ability to read minds and their spiritual gifts. And what I say all the time is this is not about autism. I
I've
think
heard you
this is
say
about
that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is about non-speakers. And I think especially often with apraxia, which is the disconnect between your mind and your body. Your body does not do what your mind wants it to do, and so many of the non-speakers I've met don't even know they have a body at first. That's often a part of their journey, right? Like, where are my hands, where are my feet? Wanting to wear heavy shoes so they can feel where their bodies are, or have a heavy necklace on so they always know where their chest is, or need to be touched or tapped on the hand before they start spelling so they can remember where their hand is. So I think this existing more in your consciousness space than your body is maybe part of how this is possible. And and I think, like so many other ways humans exist in the world, if one of our senses is not there, we find different ways to heighten senses and to connect with our world in other meaningful ways. So I think thought sharing or telepathy, if you want to say, is one of the ways that their senses might be heightened. And I think what kind of the arc I take people on is by episode 6 of the Telepathy Tapes, and the series is supposed to go in order. It doesn't make sense if you don't go in order. You got to go in order. But with episode 6, we really dive into the science behind this and how this could be possible. Because right now, in our world, right, things like clairvoyance and telepathy and remote viewing should not be possible with the materialist paradigm in which we exist. And in that episode, we talk about how if we look at materialism, which is like kind of the basics of everything is physical or things you can measure, right? So it's physics and biology and, psychology and math. And at the tippy top of that is consciousness, which we can't explain where it comes from or what it does or why it exists. And then, but if you flip the whole pyramid over, you keep all the things in the middle the same, but consciousness is at the base of the pyramid. It's fundamental. It created all the physical. Well, then things like telepathy and clairvoyance, remote viewing, all of that can be possible because all of our world is consciousness and thought first. So it was a long rambling answer, but that's
No,
kind
I
of where
mean,
I ended up.
that's like amazing. And that is what you speak of being like the kind of the paradigm shift many times throughout the podcast. And yeah, it's funny, like I've gone through many different kind of phases of being extremely spiritually, like maybe overzealous in my early years, and then kind of pulling back and being a bit more scientifically minded, and also going into like conspiracy corners, and then being like, no, it's all kind of ridiculous. And yeah, I don't know, the kind of whole premise of like consciousness being at the base of the pyramid is a fundamental reshuffling of the way we see the universe. So
Yeah.
it opens up some of the biggest questions. Like you say, science doesn't have answers to some of the biggest questions that we can ask, like what is consciousness?
Yeah.
Is there a God? Not to discredit science. Science has done an incredible job of mapping the world in every single dimension that we can understand. But yeah, I feel instinctively that there are limitations to this materialist worldview. We really don't know. The world is stranger than fiction, isn't it? Reality is stranger than
Yeah.
fiction, and we really don't know why we're here, what we are, what our purpose is, what our
Yeah.
abilities are. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, maybe we could kind of linger on the kind of the materialist worldview, or maybe almost like the scientism or scientific dogma that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm really not trying to crap on it. It's done so many things. I'm all for science, but
Yeah.
I do see
100%.
some limitations. And maybe we could kind of just start with what is maybe the response to your podcast been from the scientific community?
I think it's been really positive, actually,
Great.
because I think there are a lot of scientists and academia who who know that we can't ignore these strange loopholes within materialism that we can't account for, which
Mm,
are savant skills and are things that we know without being taught, or that are these elements of a near-death experience. And um, there's just so much that we have data on now, and you can't ignore it. So even though a lot of those researchers or academics might not be able to be open about it, in their department, or applying for grants or on research for this until they retire, I think they appreciate that materialism does have some of this wrong, and that there is sort of this like post-materialist way of thinking. And those researchers and those scientists are seeing that consciousness is fundamental, and that seems to be a big change. And actually, the kind of just from the emails I'm getting, I almost see it as like, wow, this is going to be the people that aren't on this post-materialist bandwagon, like in 100 years, they're going to be like the flat earthers that were like, oh boy, did they have it wrong. How foolish do they look now?
right. No, absolutely, totally. Have you had you do talk about it in the podcast a lot about the difficulties of getting a lot of the testing that you've been done over the line to be accepted as scientifically flawless. Is that kind of still the case? I really get the feeling that making a podcast like this and having this success, like it might not be going through the scientific rigor that will come next, but getting that
Yeah,
many
exactly.
people excited and interested and open-minded to a new concept like this will generate a lot of intelligent people wanting to go into the space, or
Yeah,
maybe wealthy people wanting to fund the projects. But yeah, so
right.
what are the restrictions that you hope can be overcome through, I guess, the scientific method?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, because I think it's really important, because like Dr. Powell, who started doing this research around telepathy and non-speaking individuals, 15 years ago, she couldn't get funding to do it. And I think a lot of researchers and scientists with, credible careers who have wonderful proposals and interests that are valid can't get this research funded in a major way. So she's always wanted to do, really legit, peer-reviewed, university-backed tests around this, but hasn't gotten the funding to do it. So with the film, or the podcast, when I was thinking, the podcast never was supposed to happen. I think, so we can get to that in a second. I was always trying to make a movie about this, and we couldn't get it. Or not a movie, a docuseries, and we couldn't get the docuseries picked up in the States. And people seemed to love the pitch, but they just didn't know the mandate in which it would fit, for their network. It wasn't true crime. It wasn't like creepy, cold paranormal. It wasn't like family, TV. It wasn't celebrity. I think people were just like, wow, we like it, but we don't know what to do with it. So, so what I decided was, maybe I should put out the podcast to try to get people knowing this and interested in this. Because if it never gets made, I will feel responsible for like letting this incredible story that could really, what I thought, like change humanity. Because that's the impact it had on me, right? So I was like, this feels so important. I can't just let my drives gather dust and let this die because an American network doesn't want to pick it up. So that's when I was like, out of desperation and almost out of like a promise made kept to the families, I was like, I have to get the podcast out. So the research that the podcast follows was like my proof of concept research as a filmmaker. Going into this, I didn't know. I mean, this was not my world. This was not necessarily my interest, was something along this line. So I was scared about putting my career, my reputation, even my own funding into something if it wasn't true. I mean, that, like, as a nonfiction storyteller, that's like the worst thing that can happen, right? So I wanted to follow this and do my own tests and see for my own eyes and make sure that this was a legit phenomenon, so that if it was, I could pitch it in earnest. I could go make this project in earnest, knowing I had done my due diligence. So all the footage and of tests and stuff that were captured in the telepathy tapes was my attempt at my own due diligence to see, was this a credible phenomenon? But it's not meant to be like the university-backed official test. So those will come now. Dr. Powell has, I believe, received the funding she needs to get that going, and she'll be doing it this year, and we'll film those for the end of her kind of storyline in the film.
Yeah, fantastic. Were there any kind of cases that, I mean, you do kind of begin in episode 1 with things that really turned you around, and your cameraman, who was a skeptic, around. But were there any other like specific cases with specific kids that you just thought, like, I don't know, just really took you and just kind of really changed how you're viewing what's actually going on?
Yeah, I mean, every single one of the interactions that I had were unbelievable, and I think like one of the things that's not in the podcast, but when Mia was the first non-speaker that we met, and she was coming up from Mexico to do tests in California, and that's where episode 1 takes us. It starts at that point, and I kind of rented an Airbnb, and I took the mirrors down, and I'm sure there's no reflective surfaces, but the cameras up, bought my own cues, my own iPads to download the number generator, so that way it was like Dr. Powell couldn't touch it, nothing could be tainted. I could really understand the truth behind this. And the day before that, we went out and met Mia's family for dinner. And I asked a question at one point, and there was a translator there. And Mia picks up and starts answering in English. And even the family was like, how did she do that? She just answered your question in English. And I'm like, hell if I know. I don't know. I mean, it was like my first what? Like, it was just really a sense of wonderment. And what I enjoyed is so often those senses of wonderment were being experienced with the families at the same time. And I think a lot of the non-speakers too really wanted to, they all did, show what they could do to prove that this was they're capable. And so many of the parents were being like, they never sit to this long, they want to do this so badly, they're so excited to show this. And so for a lot of parents, their children were spelling more than usual, or being more forthcoming, because they so badly wanted to get this information out there. So like, even when, I discovered the information about the Hill, which is a telepathic chat room that some non-speakers can access. And it sounds like there's many all over the world. But one thing that was interesting is, I remember when John Paul said there's 4,000 people on a Hill today because they're excited that this documentary crew is here noting this stuff. And Libby was like, 4,000 people. Oh, that's his mom. I didn't know that many people could go on at once. So I think there was just every day working with the families, there was something like that, that not just I was marveling at, but often the parents were as well.
Hmm. I feel like the hill, when that's kind of mentioned and explored in the podcast, that at least for me was a moment where you're just like, wait, what? And then,
Yeah.
the more people you're kind of speaking to, or, whether it's teachers, or I think there was, maybe it was at a pastor or something, who was also
Yeah.
mentioning it, and it just
Yeah.
keeps popping up without your prompting. That's one of
Yep.
those moments that kind of almost gives you a bit of a shiver down the spine, right? Like,
Yeah, it
like,
does. And that was the thing too. Yeah.
no,
I mean,
please.
just like for the hill, because the first time I heard about it, you don't know what to make of it. Like all of this was new, and I knew the parents hadn't been listened or believed, or they'd been dismissed and ridiculed about this stuff all along. So I did not want to be that person. I wanted to be open.
Mm.
And so as I'm starting to hear about the hill, I just didn't know what to make of it. And then I thought, well, maybe some of the individuals in Atlanta can link up there. That was kind of when I left Georgia. I'm like, okay, I think that's what's going on. There's like 4 or 5 friends go to this place. But you're right. I mean, once I heard a minister in Arizona who'd never even heard of it, and he was asking me on the Zoom call, like, can you believe there's someone they talked about a hill? Like, we know what that is. And, then I heard a teacher in Chicago talking about it. And when it just kept coming up and coming up and coming up in different contexts. And the thing that was really remarkable too is, up until the telepathy tapes came out, most of these families didn't know each other except for the groups in Atlanta. These teachers certainly didn't know each other. They were so many individuals or families or groups were in these little silos. And that's one of the things that's been the most, I'd say, exciting, rewarding, just cool after the release of the telepathy tapes is every day I'm getting emails from teachers, in particular therapists, speech pathologists, principals, rabbis, ministers, parents who are saying things like, I have experienced this. I just bit my tongue. This is true for me as well. In fact, my child or my student also can do X, Y, and Z. Um, I'm so happy this is out in the open. They're so happy this is out in the open. This has been so hard to live with this without people knowing. I mean, it's just been remarkable to see that, or hear
Mm.
that.
Mm. So what exactly is the hill? I mean, you kind of just described it as like a kind of telepathic chat room, but I mean, the implications are so much more than that. I mean, it suggests that there is a metaphysical space
Mm-hmm.
where all these non-speakers seem to be able to go communicate, hang out, form relationships, and just basically socialize, which is completely what they're not able to do due to the limitations of their, I guess, body connection. You did kind of describe it as a bit of like almost like a telepathic chat room, but did you get any more information out of any of these individuals? Does it appear like it's a kind of a physical space that they can move around in? I mean, they mentioned there was like 4,000 people, so there must be some kind of way of actually counting or being aware of how
Yeah.
many people. It can't just be noise. Yeah, did you get
Yeah.
more information on the nature or the mechanics of this, of what this place is?
Yeah. It's interesting because as I was going through this, so much of it was just like taking a lot of this in, trying to understand what things were. I mean, I was as wide-eyed as anyone, and I think that seeing how the Hill has resonated with the public is making me realize, like, wow, okay, there needs to be some more questions answered here. And so for the film, one of the things I'm most excited for is like we have money in the budget to hire some non-speaking advisors that will work with the GFX team, the graphics team, to help depict what the hill looks like or what the realms are that they describe. And is it a physical place? Or is it a consciousness field? Is it audible or visual, as you were asking? Um, and so it might not be non-speakers even featured in the film. These will probably just be non-speakers who are really able to like have the time and the space and are open enough on the spelling boards that they can work with a graphics team. So hopefully we'll have this well defined by then.
Hmm.
Um, the first bonus episode, I'm releasing something called the Talk Tracks, which starts coming out Sunday night, and that's going to be like
Great.
unpacking the telepathy tapes. The first episode that I just finished the draft of today was about Dan, who's a volunteer in one of these classrooms that's constantly featured in the telepathy tapes, accessing the hill. And for him, he talks about how it was only audible. It wasn't visual, but he might not have the same ability to get there, right?
Right. God, I mean, there's just so much to talk about and unpack. I almost just feel like I'm tripping over myself on which direction to go in, because it's just
I
it's
know.
all just so amazing. But yeah, I mean, the first time I kind of, I guess what I'm kind of getting at is like the implications of these things just really do open up so many huge questions on what is actually going
Yeah.
on this plane of existence. Like I
Right.
think the first time I ever became softened my ideas to telepathy was, I don't know if you're familiar with Ram Dass, the American spiritual teacher, but
Mm-mm.
he basically claimed years ago when he was exploring spirituality through his guru in India, that his guru just read his mind, and that he relayed information that was completely impossible to have known. And yeah, Ram Dass kind of goes on to talk about consciousness and our experience of almost being like channels, which kind of resonated quite well with me. You know, you can identify on an ego level, you can identify on a soul level, and then you can even click up even more channels where there's just other things going on. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that kind of resonated with me a bit, but it does beg to, you know, question what exactly is consciousness. Like what are we? Are we antennas that consciousness is just kind of a field that we are receiving and it coming through? Are we generating consciousness and we have like almost like an electromagnetic field that can just exchange information, like, I don't know, various devices?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what even are we? Like, it just,
I know.
it's such a it's such a re again, like I say, if this stuff is true, and I just keep saying that because I'm only really hearing this through one podcast at the moment. I mean, I've listened to various other things that explore the same kinds of ideas, but you know, it does kind of beg to question, like, is there a God? Like, are we tapping into, I don't know, we just reflections of a source consciousness? You mentioned at the start about consciousness being at the bottom of the pyramid, which again is without any kind of scientific backup, but it's an idea that's really resonated with me. Maybe we look at the world as binary, you know, ones and zeros, like time and space, but maybe it's actually a third dimension that is the consciousness, that the witness that actually is needed for anything to exist at all. I mean, do you
Right.
have many thoughts on?
Well, I mean, in episode 3, one of the parents, Katie, asked me what's a fork, and I'm like, what's a fork? I don't know. And she's like, well, what was it before? It was a fork. And I said, I don't know, stainless steel. And she's like, no, it was a thought. Look
Hmm,
at everything in your house. Everything around you is a thought. And it is a weird exercise when you look at the car and like, someone thought that. The house I'm sitting in, someone thought that. The design of it, someone thought that. Everything was a thought that makes up our world. Everything was a thought first. The house didn't come first. Someone thought of it. I mean, the only thing that that's not true of is the ground we're standing on, right? The
nature,
oceans.
right?
But then you're like, but then it's like, maybe that was someone else's thought.
Hmm, hmm,
So, so that very well could be, right? Like the earth and the nature was maybe not my thought, but was a different thought from something else that's more fundamental. But certainly everything human beings created started as a thought. So this idea that consciousness and thought is the fundamental baseline is all around us. It's not wild. Um, so I think there's so much truth to that. And the thing that I was not expecting, and I think it's really clear for people who go through the podcast, like episodes 1 through 4 is really like this me trying to do the scientific rigor in my own way. Like I said, I'm not Dr. Powell. This isn't university back tests. This was just me proof of concepting. And I thought, okay, we're talking about telepathy. There's got to be a way to prove this or understand it. Maybe it's electromagnetic, message passing, or there's some sort of, it's like a magnet or it's a wave. And as we find out in episode 6, that's been tested. All those questions I had have already been borne out, and we know it's not a waveform, at least that we can test, because these remote viewing and telepathy tests can still work through a Faraday cage, which is blocks out a lot of those waves and electromagnetic waves. But sorry, I'm rambling here a little bit, but I think
no, not at all.
um, when it comes to what happened after that I was not expecting was that so many non-speakers did start talking about spiritual stuff, and God was like paramount to that. And I think that was a question of mine when we talk about fundamental consciousness. Is that the same thing as talking about God or this source or this life source? Because I certainly am someone now who trusts the non-speaker's words. I have no doubt in what they're saying. It takes a lot of effort to spell versus to communicate. They use their words very wisely. They make sure they land intentionally, and they're not going to lie, and they're not in some grand effort to deceive any of us. Why would they be? There's no, at least at this point in the world, there's no real way for a non-speaking individual who can't control their body to have a career, to have money, to have fame. None of those ego things matter to them. So there's no reason to deceive. It's just so when they started talking about spiritual matters and God and traveling to other realms, and many of them were talking about studying with God, studying with Buddha, learning from a rabbi, going somewhere at night where they learn different ideas. Like I was really scared to put that in the podcast because I thought I was just studying telepathy and doing telepathy tests and maybe trying to help prove that. And when it started going there, I felt really uncomfortable. That's not a comfortable space for me at all. And I figured the whole world would just dismiss all first 4 episodes about the telepathy when everything started going into that. But what was really clear to me is these individuals have been censored forever. Who am I to now go censor their words because it makes me feel uncomfortable? That's not okay, So it was like, okay, I feel comfortable with the telepathy tests. Everything else started spinning out of control when they're talking about seeing spirits and studying with God and traveling to heaven. And I was like, whoa, boy, but the best thing I think for anyone working with non-speaking individuals is you can't censor their words. It takes so much to get them out. And I can say 100% that every non-speaker I've ever met wants to talk about that stuff more than anything else, about love, about unity, about God being the connector of all of us. And it's profound, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I have a big interest in all of these concepts and stuff. And I think, I do often, I love exploring the ideas of what is God. Is there a God? But I think so often the word God is just such a loaded term. It does put so many people off who might not have grown up religious or anything. And, instantly thinking of, old wise man in the sky, like Christian God or whatever, is a where a lot of people's minds go. But back to what we were talking about consciousness being a fundamental ingredient to the universe, which it kind of makes sense to me. I mean, and yeah, everything being a thought. I mean, maybe the Big Bang was the first thought, or at least the first thought in this version of the universe. If there's like many universes, it could just be
right.
And as a result, that's why it just exploded, because as far as the eye can see is as far as physical matter exists, and as it keeps kind of expanding, the universe keeps expanding.
Yeah.
And, things keep needing to be ordered, to be made sense of in some kind of, I don't know if mind is the right word. Mind is probably not the right word, but some kind of intelligence, maybe some kind of all-knowing intelligence, or, it's a lot to ponder. And back to kind of what you were saying about being scared to talk about certain things. I mean, in my mind, that's kind of what true science should be. It should be following the research wherever it goes, even if it goes into places you don't want it to go. Like you probably didn't want it to go in that direction. And that's just a little reminder of the biases that we all kind of carry in trying to figure out whatever we want to prove, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was a thing, is like all throughout this, it was like, this makes me feel uncomfortable, but it seems to be important. This is uncomfortable, but it's an uncomfortable, truth for all I can tell. Even when, in episode 3, we talk about a non-speaker who came home to his mom having been given like rocks and crystals from a masseuse. And this mom, who was a, extremely evangelical Christian woman, like did not believe in rocks, didn't believe in crystals, was kind of thought this was really new agey when someone gave her this. and her son like basically broke down 2 doors, to get to the rocks and crystals that were kept in her primary bathroom. Um, was so excited, brought them to his bedside and put them, right next to his head, and was talking about the energy that the rocks were emitting.
Hmm.
And then sure enough, like every rock does have a vibration. And, I looked it up and I'm like, what? This stuff is true? I mean, that was another thing that I just thought, like, crystals and rocks don't have energy. I never understood like rock and crystal stores. I figured the belief in them gave them power, but like they didn't actually have power. And so having Houston kind of validate that was, again, just another topsy-turvy thing that I had to reconsider.
Yeah. Yep. Um, yeah. I mean, do you think there are things that science just can't answer? Just in the kind of worldview that we've got, are there things that we just kind of are unable to actually answer in our current predicament? I mean, like, God, it goes into so many strange directions. Like one of the people you're talking to is claiming that he's communicating with family members who have deceased, who have already left their bodies. John, is it John Paul? I forget his
Yeah,
I forget
yeah.
his girlfriend's name.
Lily.
Lily. She claims that she's still communicating with John Paul after he
Yeah,
passed. Um,
yeah.
you know, I, is that possible to prove? I feel like it's not possible to prove.
Well, I mean,
Not saying it's not real.
no, I'm not saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know,
But
is it possible to prove? And think that's a question because so much of science has been quantitative and not qualitative, right? Like it's
mm,
about like what numbers and what measurements. And I think the stories that people have to, and experiences people have matter. And we need to decide, do they matter enough to look at, because when someone knows something that they absolutely could not have known unless they somehow communicated with someone who is no longer here, right? Who's passed on. There's a lot of those types of stories that are happening with non-speaking individuals. And I think there are legit mediums and such for sure on Earth that are having those experiences as well. So what does that mean? But when you really start to question it, and then you start to believe that the telepathy could be true, it's like, well, is that someone just diving deep into your mind or your consciousness and pulling out a memory or pulling out
right,
this,
right.
or is that person's soul and life recorded somewhere, right? Just like when something goes into a black hole, like there's sort of like, whatever it was is on like the
The
curve of the
Akashic
black hole.
records.
Yeah, it's like, is it recorded? And so is it really the soul coming through, or is it just like being able to like pull down the information or download that someone's life? And I think those questions are being definitely dealt with and considered in the um, in terms of with paranormal researchers and that type of thing. So, or parapsychology, I guess is the better word for it. Like within parapsychology, that is a conversation. Um, but when I have talked to non-speakers about it, or I've been trying to figure out and discover and talk to some like really legitimate mediums who have been tested and passed all these interesting uh, kind of gotcha tests that, there's a few that can really pass those types of tests. And they will say that they believe absolutely it's not pulling out someone else's deep memories or consciousness, or not downloading information from the quote unquote Akashic record or collective consciousness. It's a soul that
Right,
remains and
right.
continues.
So, I mean, but again, kind of just like to the question, like, what are we? Like, I mean, are us neurotypical people who are going around our lives, turning up to work and stuff, are we able to tap into these abilities? Is this like an ingrained human experience that maybe just for the purpose of our survival, that it's probably not all that useful to be astral traveling and connecting on the hill every second moment? Like, being on the physical plane is very much a huge part, probably one of the biggest parts of our incarnations, or whatever we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about it. I think a lot of like very overzealous spiritualists can get a bit emphasizing the other more than what we're dealing with here. I think it's all
Yeah.
one and the
Yeah.
same, but on the contrary, we
Right.
discredit the other stuff. So,
Right.
do you think we have potential to explore these, I don't know,
Well,
telepathic soul realms?
Yes. And I mean, I think it's always been a part of us, right? Like if you were to go back and talk to, I think any native cultures and the Vikings and the Druids and, whoever, I mean, these things were not unusual, were not abnormal. The sense that you knew exactly what was happening to someone. In fact, the man who invented the QEEG brain scan spent his life trying to study the brain, because when he was about to be run over by horses in some military practice, I believe it was, his sister had a vision of it, hundreds of miles away, and like wrote to him. And that was pretty confounding, and I know Mark Twain, the American author, he used to talk about mental telegraphy, which they called it at the time, which was, this thing that happened a lot years ago, where you'd be thinking of someone you might not have spoken to 5 years, sometimes 7, and you get a letter. And it was postmarked the same day that you just sent them a letter, 5 days prior or whatever. You're both thinking of them and sent a letter. So stuff is not new. And I actually plan on doing a talk track about some of this, because there was some research at, I believe it was at the IONS in the United States, which looked at, okay, are the people with these psi abilities kind of the X-Men, right, in our societies? Meaning, because often you hear, oh, grandma has the gift, right? Or, grandpa had second sight and so do you. Like those are lores that we know and we've heard. And so they try to test people that have the history of these abilities in their families versus those who don't. And what they found out is the people who don't have the abilities are actually deviant, DNA. That's the abnormal. And when looking at those groups of people who don't have the abilities, you could link it right back to the Spanish Inquisition, where they were going around Europe trying to stamp out people with second sight, and the people who were quote unquote levitating and had clairvoyance and telepathy and could do this and do that, and the witches and the warlocks of the land, right? And it's like they were effective because the gene pool has been effective or has been affected by that. So I think all of the stuff is there. And the question, I mean, I always just like to think about what the non-speakers would say. And one young man was so perplexed as to why we so desperately need to measure some of these, because I think for most of the non-speakers, they would say these are spiritual gifts, quote unquote. And the greatest of all of our spiritual gifts is love. We will dive into a choppy ocean to save someone. It doesn't make sense. It's not evolutionary beneficial, but we'll do it out of love. Adrenaline, when someone's being pinned by a car, can make a mother lift it off of their child. Love makes us do the most unbelievable things that don't make sense. And that is our greatest superpower. But we're not out to study that. Like, we're not trying to measure that. We're not trying to measure love as real or if love exists. And I think to some degree, the non-speakers think our efforts to measure connection, deep spiritual connection, which we use the word telepathy. I think they would use the word thought sharing or, other things. Yeah, we can try to do it. We can do these tests, but what's the point? Like, if we know it's real, we know it can connect us in times of deep crisis and need and fear. That's what counts. That's the measurement.
Yeah. Also just like science will often reduce love to chemicals firing off in the brain, it's, I mean, I feel that it's, obviously so much more than that.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, you were mentioning the Spanish Inquisition, and this might sound like a bit of a conspiratorial kind of a question, but do you think some of this stuff has been intentionally suppressed? Like for example, I've listened to quite a few podcasts and had quite a bit of interest into, in the 70s, the US military intelligence, they had programs like the Stargate Project and stuff. So in our kind of realm, science will say no to certain things, and then funding stops and we don't explore. But the US military and intelligence, they don't need to get the approval of science. They've got their budgets, and they it seems like in the 70s, right, they saw something there, and they put a lot of money and a lot of resources into remote viewing and various other things. But remote viewing was something that has been documented. There are still people alive and around that were part of that program. And, they talk about locating all sorts of like people, things, items, bases based on this basically spiritual abilities, which are still largely shut down. Do you think that there is some kind of a suppression of this? I mean, just as you're talking about, just the harsh snapback reaction to the concept of allowing these nonverbal children to use spelling. There's like it's affecting their lives. It's ruining their lives by not being listened to. I can get the doubt, but it doesn't make sense to me why there'd be such a fierce refusal or just ignoring that.
Do you know if there's that refusal in Australia the way there is in America?
Look, this world of nonverbal autism is all just so new to me. I don't know.
Okay.
I just don't know. The tides are definitely changing in a lot of different ways, I think. And I think spiritual stuff is definitely becoming more open. I mean, look at the UFO phenomenon. People can finally talk about that. People have been... They've had their lives ruined. Yeah. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't have a good answer to that, but.
Well, I mean, look, it is not good for the governments, for politicians, for militaries, if people can be reading their minds, right?
Right.
So I would think that, and I think any time that the greater public has felt like they have power, that's not good for a lot of governments and military objectives and big business and all these things that I think in many ways harm us all the time and don't have our best interests at heart, right? And I think this could blow the door wide open and change so much. And I think what the non-speakers would say is like, great, you all should be living in unity. You should not be caring about money and you should not be, like exploiting the earth's resources. You need to be caring for animals and caring for the earth and the ground and the soil and each other. And, that would be the concern. So all the concerns of government and money and special interests should go away. And so I think on a big scale, like telepathy is part of making that happen. Like if we actually want to have a global evolutionary shift, then becoming wide open and clear on our thoughts so that they're not damaging people is part of it, right? And I've actually found that, and I've encountered that with other individuals, of course, while working. That's people would be like, I don't know if I want someone reading my thoughts, and
it's a bit scary, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, and like we're all human, of course. Like you're gonna have like a bad thought about that person, or like, oh, that person's so annoying, or like, I want to get out of this party right now, or gosh, don't like whatever, or like,
or worse, way worse,
or worse, right, or a microaggression, or yes, you're attracted to someone who's not your spouse. I mean, I think those are things that are part and parcel of being human, which would probably make us chuckle if we all had that open, right? I really do. It's when they become secrets and when they become bitter and when they become embroiled in like our own conspiracy narratives in our brain that they become damaging. But when it's little fleeting things, I think that we could all learn to love and enjoy each other in that light, especially because I think if the more you control your thoughts, the more you control your actions, the more you control your personhood. And I've said that to someone who I've met who's very worried about his thoughts being read. And I kept saying, like, just change your thoughts, dude. Like, it'll change your whole life. Just change your thoughts. And he was like, I can't change my thoughts. It's like, try. Because if we all were doing that effort of trying, right, and trying to be more loving and think more purely and be more kind and be more generous and trying less to think about us, but more like the other person, it wouldn't be scary for our thoughts to be heard or shared or known. So if we all deeply care about evolving as a human race, and as so many non-speakers have said to me or to their parents or to teachers, like kindness is the best way to evolve. Like telepathy, all of this is part and parcel of that growth. It's going to require a massive shifting in our thoughts and like our human brain, which is often not geared toward kindness and unity.
Right. In the final episode, in their words, we hear from a lot of the non-verbal kids in their words, and it's one thing that I heard come up a few times is we are light workers. Quite a few of them, it sounds like they believe that they're on a mission. They feel like a mission to help humanity or something.
Yeah.
What's going on there? How do they? What are they in their eyes? Are they sent here? Do they just have different abilities? I mean, I guess it's a huge spectrum, isn't it, of different
Yeah.
abilities? But what do you make of these people saying we are light workers?
Yeah, it is. Wow. I mean, like I said, I was not expecting that. And, there's are those things where I'm editing it. I'm like, oh, this is going to feel so strange to so many people. Do I put it in there? And you have to, because it's their words. And yeah, quite a few people said we are light workers. And like you said, you can't use a big, broad brush for this population, I think, or any population for that matter. And I do think depending on the culture and like the family that surrounds you and how you're being brought up, it does impact the lens and the filter in which, like, just like any of us, a non-speaker or a voice user, are going to filter out and like understand their world. So, we're all living in the same physical 3D world, but I think some of the non-speakers who might have been more felt more free to explore, the spiritual realms, or been more, emboldened or like, accepted to kind of talk about interdimensionality, talk about even things like choosing this life and why they chose it and what it means. I have found that quite a few talk about things like that, and when they are talking about that, they are saying that they are here helping and trying to evolve us. You know, not every single non-speaker has said that, but quite a few have. So it's hard to say. I mean, I think autism can be such a difficult, especially non-speaking autism with apraxia, can be such a difficult life to live, not being able to control your body and having it be unruly and not listen to you. And it's really can be so frustrating for the individual who can't speak and have their truth be known. So, I certainly don't want to say like, yes, they're choosing this to evolve us, but some of them themselves have said that. So
have some of them on the more metaphysical, spiritual, interdimensional kind of scale of their spiritual abilities? Has non-human entities ever kind of come up?
Well, non-human intelligence certainly does, and that comes up quite a bit. In fact, to a point where I was like, wow, but what is it that they're talking about? Because they will talk about sort of dark forms, like almost like a demon or some dark thing that is present and powerful and real. And they also talk about more light forms that are intelligent and helpful and beautiful and kind. And it's like, is that an angel? And I've definitely heard them say angels and demons, but others will talk about other beings that they interact with and that they can communicate with. And, I'm thinking of one young man in particular who lives in Wisconsin, who talks about interdimensional travel all the time. And he says, for me, it's seamless. I can go to any of the dimensions all the time. And from what I've gleaned when talking to him is it sounds like we're all stacked on top of each other. We're all right here, on this earth. A lot of the mystery things that seem to confound us and confuse us, and is this and is it that, and is it coming from way out there? It's like, nope, we're all here, just kind of layered on top of each other. And this young man's ability to bounce back and forth through many dimensions and even engage with many at the same time is something he talks about quite often, all the time. And I was actually thinking about releasing his whole audio that he sent me for episode 10, because it's just that cool for a talk track. I had to edit down so I could fit a lot of people in, but yeah, it makes you wonder for sure. And that's the thing is, like, I'm not an expert on this. I don't know a lot of these answers as well. Like I'm hoping that the podcast, the Telepathy Tapes, just helps more researchers get into this and quantum physicists and people who understand this
Right,
and
right,
who
right.
studied it come
I
forth
feel
with
like it
new
will.
theories.
I really feel like it will,
Hmm.
Kai. I mean, it seems to resonate with so many people. I've just told
Hmm.
so many people about it, and then people write to me like, "Oh my god!" And I heard you got a shout out on Joe Rogan a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
all like it's reaching people. You know, it really is.
Hmm.
It's fantastic. I mean, God, it really feels like you've stumbled across a glitch in the matrix. Like all these
It
things.
feels that way sometimes.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, you even touch on simulation theory and stuff. I mean, God, there is so much to explore that
Right.
we're not going to get to all
Yeah.
today. But what moving, like, you know, after we've all kind of heard this and stuff, and you know, what do we do? What can we do with this information? What do you hope is the way moving forward past this you know, beyond this podcast
Yeah.
for everyone?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that have been the dreams, right? I mean, one is a paradigm shift. I want people to really start to consider not just shrugging off ideas because they seem out there you didn't learn about in school, but to imagine the structures that surround us and why we embrace and love materialism so much. And this idea that scientism is sort of a religion of its own that has made some people dogmatic and
Mm-hmm.
closed-minded
Mm-hmm.
to the
Yeah.
point that they
Yeah.
will just shrug off anything. And that's not helpful.
No.
We need to have a freedom of inquiry. A freedom of inquiry is how we move science and humanity forward. You have to ask questions, even if they seem ridiculous, because those ridiculous questions have gotten us electricity and modern medicine and, airplanes. So, uh, just getting back to that freedom of inquiry is essential. And in doing so, let's question our paradigm, this materialism, and is consciousness really a big question mark that just came at the very end, or is it the baseline of everything? So I hope that paradigm shift is evident. And then the next thing, probably most important to me, really, is that non-speakers are presumed to be competent. All over the world, people have treated them as though they're not in there because they can't control their bodies usually. And that is not a fair assessment. And it's, I think, a human rights violation to withhold and not make accessible their means of communication, which is spelling to communicate in many cases via a letterboard or via an iPad. So getting spelling in schools, presuming competence is the most essential thing for this population. And when we do that, I think watch out, right? Because I think so many of these individuals can help us be the future of, or may be themselves the future of science, the future of medicine, the future of spirituality, the future of, uh, so many things in our world.
Hmm. God, the world is stranger than fiction. Hey, Kai.
Yeah,
Again,
truly.
thank you so much for doing this incredible podcast and doing the work that you're doing and sharing it. And also, like, yeah, just the power of media, you know, a good reminder of the power of what media, a good presentation, a good thing, whether it's a film, a documentary, a podcast, how it can actually affect us, and you know the importance of a good mental diet. And yeah, I really hope that you know, a lot of people much smarter than me do take an interest, and people a lot wealthier than me do fund exciting projects like this. So yeah, you mentioned you've got the talk tracks coming out on Sunday. That'll be on
Mhm.
all podcast platforms, I assume.
I'll put, yep, everywhere you find your podcasts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And season two?
Season 2 is in the works, right? Right now, we have enough funding to start making the film, so we're going to start that in earnest in March, and then the season 2 will be kind of produced alongside of that. So I think we're going to really the talk tracks will be on the same feed as the telepathy tape, so people can really start to floss their mind with a lot of these conversations that will be happening, and some anecdotes and some stuff from stories, and some will be about autism, and some will be about consciousness, and some will be about science, all that stuff. And then I'm thinking season 2 will probably be around September of this year.
Fantastic. Amazing.
Hmm.
Well, Kai, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me. I really, really appreciate it. And I really can't wait to see what comes next. So, very exciting times.
Thank you, Jack. All right, take care. So
You
nice
too.
to talk to you.
Thank you.
All
All the
right,
best. Bye.
appreciate it. All right, you too. Bye bye.